How's everyone doing? Thank you for joining Brandon DeCruz, myself, Jeff Black, the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, today is episode 21, and we're going to talk a little bit more about fat loss. I think we talked about last week with our training with Mr. John Jewett, which was a great episode, which we got some amazing feedback on. So be sure to really check that out. But we're going to talk about how to adjust your training programming and volume during a diet, because this really does matter. And I come from the old school. You actually did more. You just did more drop sets and all this stuff. I'm like, man, it's amazing how awful I must have felt. Like cocaine's a hell of a drug, is what it made me realize. But anyway, so we're going to take a deep dive into all things fat loss and fat loss training today. But what Brandon and I were talking about before was the realization, like, you just can't take it with you when you leave here. Like we were just talking about, like, you could get these accolades and this and that, but dude, where I wanted to go with this, because I wanted to see what your thoughts were. So I was watching the Lee Priest documentary with Keegan. It's Lee Priest's first bodybuilding, and he's selling his trophies.
Really?
And at first I'm like, why would you sell your trophy? Like, kind of like, huh? Like, you know what I mean?
And you would think that it would hold a great deal of value, but even with that, I believe someone that I really looked up to within bodybuilding from a golden era's perspective was Frank Zane, and I believe he sold one of his Olympia level or his Olympia title trophies. He won 3 over the years, I believe 78, 79, and maybe 80 or 81, and he sold one of them. And I remember he's a very he's really a deep thinker. If you really watch him, watch his documentaries, watch his interviews, or read any of his books. The guy has like 15 books. They're amazing. Very artistic person in terms of both bodybuilding and then life in general. And it was really that this was his body, the sculpture that he made was an expression of himself, and no trophy, despite that being the paramount. Think about it. Lee Priest is selling pro titles, but he's selling the Olympia. That is the paramount of this industry. It was a representation of a goal achievement, but his entire life was working towards the continual progression. So every year he used to do photo shoots up until the time he was in his late 70s. It was just about progressing his physique, not about the actual fact. The Olympia was like a check mark on the path and on the journey to self-development and growth. It wasn't the end point for him.
Yeah, it was just interesting because he was like, they're just sitting in my box, in my garage collecting dust. And that's exactly where mine are. Like, I don't have any of mine there because
I have them out in your garage, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I could relate to him because he's like, they're up in your head. Like, I'm like, yeah, like some of the best parts, like me competing across stage in 2017, when I came out with just nasty conditioning. I can't tell you much about like the experience as much as I can about my friends I talked to backstage, like Zach, Dom, Chris, a few people I met, just like, you know what I mean? Like I can tell you more about those memories than anything. The brotherhood, like the friendships that you form. That was what I remember more about my competitive career. It was just interesting how he inflected it all. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. I think early on in my competition career, I was so goal oriented rather than process oriented. I was young. I was already within the fitness industry doing modeling, and I thought this was another, it was early on in men's physique. So I was winning shows. And I remember even after the first show I ever won, I cried, like, because I'd been training already, 10 plus years, and it was a huge goal achievement. But after that, I kind of felt empty. And it kind of made me realize and take more reflection into the fact that, am I doing this for a trophy? Am I doing this for validation from a group of judges? And nothing against judges. I have friends that are judges. I have an immense amount of respect for judges. But, eventually I got to the point where I just do this for me. And so I was on a podcast last week, actually, with a couple close friends of mine, one being Jeremiah Bear. And he asked me, like, what's your endpoint for this diet, like this current dieting phase I'm in? And I told him I don't have one. I don't have an external goal. I don't have an extrinsic goal. It is for the intrinsic process of seeing if I could still push myself, if I still got more. You know what I mean? I have a mantra within my head, and this actually came from Frank Zane. It wasn't the mantra that I say to myself, didn't come from Frank Zane, but this actual ideology of getting a mantra that you say to yourself over and over. And there's been times that I've been going through struggles in life, whether it's a rehabilitation from, my car accident, my surgeries, or it was a really trying time in my life, death of parents. I had both my grandparents killed in a car accident at once. You know what I mean? Like things like that. And training has always been my outlet for that. But oftentimes I have to deeply look within myself and say, mine is you got more. So that's just my internal mantra. And actually, it's funny, I always said it in a third person, but there's actually research behind that shows that when you say it in the third person, you end up believing it more, because it's almost like a mentor or a trusted confidant is telling you rather than you telling yourself. And so, really at this point, this is all about the process for me. I'm extremely process oriented. It's just about pushing myself on a daily basis and just seeing if I could like run up the scoreboard on myself. It's not about anyone else. It's not about the trophies. It's not about the end result. It is about the progression, the pursuit of self excellence and development and progression within that. And so, I can relate to that. Obviously, I've never been on this champion level. I've won, state level shows and regional shows and things of that sort. But even, being a pro, Lee Priest does not, I haven't seen the documentary. I've seen many like Battle of the Olympias that he was in, as well as, if you remember, like those 90s documentaries.
Yeah, those were
Incredible,
so
man.
cool, man.
Those were
They were
so great,
cool.
man. I used to watch them before every show I did. I used to
Yeah.
watch every single one I could get my hands on.
Is there
But
a way to
even
keep going because of how hard we were having to kill ourselves back then? Like to the point of like, if you don't eat tons of tilapia, you won't be, skinless and all that nonsense that
dude,
they preached. It's
it's
terrible.
amazing to see the advice and the methodology that they were using back then. But you know what? It worked because they stayed focused.
Yep.
They worked on they really focused on consistent effort over time, and they weren't short-sighted like today's, a lot of people in today's society, due to social media and due to the prevalence of fitness and bodybuilding, like they were the outliers, they were the abnormalities, or the anomalies rather. And so, even in interviews that I've seen then, as well as up until recently, like he's on Dave Palumbo's show quite often, and Lee Priest has always really came across that he is not a bodybuilder. That's not what he identifies as. He is someone that attained pro status, did extremely well since his youth up until the time that he was competing in NABA. Post when he had gotten, I believe he got banned from the IFBB at one point. However,
He did.
bodybuilding is a part of his life, and this is something that I always say to my clients that are competitors, because I work with high level pros, and I always tell them bodybuilding is a part of your life. It should add to it, not take away from it, and it should never be your entire life. Because I knew far too many pros, having worked within the sports nutrition industry, I've had worked with many companies where our top sponsored athlete is a top 5 Olympia level professional. And that's what they identify as. They are the pro bodybuilder. They are the champion. And I've often seen those people transition into retirement or go through injury, go through setback, and they almost lose a part of themselves because it wasn't the process. They could still train. However, it wasn't a training that was their passion or their love. It was the winning. It was the validation. It was the crowd. It was the accolades. And when you no longer have that, when you transition into post-competitive, post-competitive portion of your career, like into real life, if you didn't have that passion for training or for self-development, you're going to be left with like an empty hole. And that can be said about anything, whether it's your career or whether it's a relationship. If everything it's your be all or end all, it's a dangerous part of the equation. You know what I mean? It might make you really dangerous within the phase itself, like within a prep, because you are so driven by trying to get that first place, that championship, that Olympia qualification. But once that, carrot on the stick is gone and you can no longer chase that, it's not even an opportunity for you. If training, if the process, if dieting, these weren't components of your life and your lifestyle that you love, that you were truly passionate about, your longevity in this is drastically compromised.
So actually funny story, and then we'll get into our last 7 days. We'll brief, and then we'll get into our topic so we don't burn up too much time. I've actually been talking about that in counseling lately, because I go like once every quarter and chat with my dude, Lindy. And I was talking about what it looks like, because I said I'm not going to compete past 45 regardless. And I turned 42 in September. So I got a few more shots if I want to try. And I'm like, man, what does it look like with 33 years of something I've quietly chased gone? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do I replace where that goes? Because like I listened to God, what was his name? Dwayne Wade, when he retired from the Heat, he had to go to counseling. And I was like, 100%, it's true, man. 100%. Because like, I really had to work on that a lot. Like, because the process isn't going to stop for me. I'm just going to have to put it somewhere else. And it's just a matter of sitting back and identifying what's next.
But that's the thing. The process is never going to end for you. You love this regardless if you're in prep or not. you will continue bodybuilding. You will continue pouring yourself into others. I tell you, in 2018, I essentially stepped away from the sport. I did 2 more shows after, but it was actually just I jumped in shows on a few days' notice because I had photo shoots that had gotten canceled. But 2018 was the last time I went to nationals. It was the last time I put my all into everything, and I had one of my athletes that was in the Olympia that year, right after my season, and I stayed prepping with him just to go throughout the process, stay in the trenches with him. But at that moment, I kind of knew, like, I'm coaching people that are much higher level and demand a lot more time and attention from myself. And I have 2 options. I can either continue pursuing a selfish endeavor, or I could pour into others. And I'll tell you, I get so much more out of working with not only, competitors, but I love working with lifestyle clients now. And that's been one of my
Yeah.
greatest passions.
I
And so
told you
just
it
seeing
would
their
be.
I
I
know, man.
fucking told you so.
I always give you credit for that, because I did work with lifestyle clients before then, but the majority of my roster nowadays is lifestyle clients, whereas we would go back 3 years ago when we first met, it was predominantly competitors. And it's not that I don't love competitors either. At this point, it's just that I've been able to help more people in things that I believe are more impactful. And what I mean by that is I'm able to help people with prediabetes, you know what I
Yep.
mean, or type 2 diabetes, and they're just having a better quality of life, both in terms of their health and in terms of their body composition. They look better, they feel better, they're more confident in their relationships, they're able to hang out and play with their kids, like do things that most people in life take advantage of, and they have never had that ability or that opportunity. And now they're better versions of themselves in all aspects, from business to their body composition to their quality of life. So it's so much deeper than just a competition prep. But I'll tell you that I pour the same enthusiasm, energy, and effort and attention to detail that I did into my own preps into my competitors, and any of them can validate and reinforce that for you guys. But I get so much more joy out of seeing them. Like, I love going to shows and seeing these guys compete, or being, on the other side of the computer, like, going back and forth with them, with our updates, or watching them and just seeing their growth and development, and also having them take a different mindset to the sport. Because that's the biggest thing. I've worked with a lot of competitors that came from that all or nothing, black and white mindset around not only prepping, but nutrition, training, all these things. And I've really tried to expand their mind and really focus on not only physical development, because we often get very fixated on that when you're in a competitive sport like bodybuilding, but also let's transfer this out. Like, let's look at progressive overload, like the concept within training. Like, we are trying to meet a sufficient stimulus to cause further adaptation, further growth. Why not apply that to every aspect of your life? Why not apply that to your relationships? Why not apply that to your business? Why not apply that to your family? And that's what I really try to get them. Let's take the positive qualities that you learn through training, that you learn through being, consistent with your diet, and being adherent to a prep, and accomplishing something and seeing it through, being consistent day in and day out, and reaping the rewards of your effort over time. And then we apply that to any other aspect of your life you want to succeed in, and it
Yep.
pays off so many dividends.
100%. So I don't know. I feel like that was a little interesting little thing me and you got to chat about real quick with the
Absolutely, man.
audience, to have a little insight into how we think on different things that are just out there that kind of tie into what we do day in and day out. All right. So how was your last 7 days? A little brief version, because we got to get in this so we make sure we have our hour covered.
I'm a man. Well, my last 7 days were phenomenal. As I had mentioned to you and to the audience, I decided to take a vacation. I had not taken off a single day off this summer. And honestly, Jeff knows this himself. I am a workaholic, so I never take off of work. And I'm going on, I was just looking over it. I'm about 3 months away from 10 years of coaching, online coaching in some capacity. And in that time, I've never taken off from emails. So, like, I have answered client emails every single day in that time period. And that's something that I've struggled with. I am someone that I always feel like I need to be productive. I need to be working. And that just came from kind of like my upbringing, my educational background, my childhood. Like, that's how my parents were and how my whole family is. And so that's a quality that, it'll build you, but it'll break you. And it's both a blessing and a curse. So this past 4 days, I actually just got back just about 30 minutes prior to us jumping on the podcast. I went away down the shore to Wildwood, which is a place I used to visit every single year growing up. And I went to a destination gym. It's called like the Jersey Shore Mecca. It's Attila's Gym. You familiar with it, Jeff?
Yeah, I am familiar with it.
Okay, so a phenomenal gym. It reminds me of when I first got into training, because it was one of the first places that I used to drive down to when I was in high school and get really quality training sessions in it. It's a gym from the 70s. A lot of top level pro bodybuilders have went there, done training footage. So I did that, and it was just a great weekend of resetting, relaxing. I finally made it out to the beach, I live by the beach and I still hadn't gotten out there all summer. So it was an incredible time. We went out to various restaurants in the area that were incredible, made sure that we took in all the views. So we had, beachside dining most nights and stuff. And I'm on a diet right now. So I'm in a fat loss phase, and I'm someone that I don't veer off plan. That's just who I am. I'm consistent in all aspects of everything I do. Like I just said, I literally just got here in time to record the podcast, but I have this motto in my life, and it's called, and what it goes by is I don't miss. So what I mean by that is I don't miss anything. So it means, I'm not going to miss an email. I'm not going to miss, an obligation, a responsibility, a text message, whatever it may be. I'm not going to miss, and that applies to all aspects of my life. So if I have a goal at hand, I'm going to work towards it until I get to it. And so I stayed on the diet. So for me, food isn't like this thing where, I need to, veer off plan because I'm out on vacation. It's more about the experience and really taking in the sight sounds and the interaction of those that I love and that I love being around. So we went out to dinner various nights. I actually had a photo shoot while I was down there that went really well. We did it both on Wildwood Beach and then also on the boardwalk. And this is with a photographer. Shout out to my man, Michael Martin, phenomenal photographer. We've shot every single year since 2015. So we have a large portfolio. I really love being able to look back at all these years, and it always serves as a reminder. We usually shoot in the summer. Last year, I was getting ready for surgery. Right after I got home from Tennessee, that I was at the PC with you last year, right prior to my surgery. The day before surgery, I went and shot with him just to keep the tradition going, because now it's, 8 years running that we've done this, and it's just a really great experience. I always look forward to. We always shoot in some of the similar locations so we can kind of compare year to year some of the shots, and so I was really happy with that. And all in all, it was a phenomenal trip. Really nice opportunity to kind of reset and refresh my mind, my body, right prior to summer being over, honestly, because this is the last week. And also, fall is always a really busy time period for clients, for competitors. And then I also usually get a big influx of people that their kids are going back to school. So they're really excited about, they're going to have some extra free time, and they really want to get back into fitness. So I will be onboarding clients all this week and next week. So man, my week was phenomenal. I'm very appreciative and thankful that I went, first and foremost, and that I had such a great time. And tell me about yours, man.
Well, good for you, man. Like I told you, it's good that you did that. Mine's been good. Been writing. I think I kicked out about 5K words last week. I'm starting to get to like the end of this other chapter ish, and then I probably have 3, maybe 4 more to go. So it's getting near the end, and then Saturday, me and my friend Robo hung out at the pool, and I drank half a bottle of Woodford Reserve bourbon and had an amazing time. We talked just business and stuff like that, looking at different business concepts and models. And then I've been spending all my free time like getting back into like you advance for a little bit, then you have to focus in other areas, advance a little bit and focus others. I've been really focusing on now website optimization, like SEO, and like understanding and reading that to be able to really maximize what I can get out of Iron House and relentlessforever.com, like the website. So been working in tandem with Thera on that. We found someone to kind of do some work for us. Really just trying to understand, because it's a competitive market, now it's completely changed. And I think that Instagram has become dull. And so like I'm having a meeting with my team and be like, hey, have fun with social. Just do what you want. Don't listen to these fucking business coaches telling you that you have to have a grid that looks all beautiful and perfect. Because when I throw random shit out there, dude, I get like the most engagement. Like today I posted, like, I was like, man, I think today is like right around now. It was 12 years ago. I was going through a divorce and I filed bankruptcy. And I was living with a mattress and a TV at the top of my friend's bedroom, and I was broke as shit. And 12 years now, I'm debt free in every aspect. You know what I mean? And it's just like
huge accomplishment.
Yeah, but it's one of those deals like it's I don't know. It's an evolutionary thing. I find that the content that I share, that's just the ones I'm just like, I'm kind of like journaling to myself, because I like to look back and be like, how much did I really grow and progress? And I think you can see that. But anyway, man, I wanted to give you my thought. So with my book, if I get to 100,000 words, I had this thought I talked about. But if I do, because I'm like right around 85,000 now, I'm floating in there. Even if only 50,000 got printed, do you know what cool of an experience that's going to be for me to like go through taking something that's like basically like a life's work, like a PhD equivalent of
Yeah.
hard work to do, and then watch it get cut up. Do you know like the amount of lesson of humility I get to learn? Like it kind of really excites me because
I mean,
I'm
it's
gonna be
essentially
like,
what they
dude,
do
I
with
can
the
fucking see
thesis.
what I'm made of. You know what I mean? Like I can see like, am I really made of brass steel? Like I think, or am I made of
Well, that
pudding?
was, that to make a little bit of an extension of that, that's kind of what I was commenting on last week in terms of the analogy between you writing a book and the process of bodybuilding and just being open to constructive criticism, whether it's from strangers or those you
Yep.
know. Because think about it in the context like this. When we do a competition prep and we get on the bodybuilding stage, it is strangers generally that are judging us and giving us
For the
constructive
most part,
criticism. We
yeah.
have to take it on. And then, but within the same context of that prep, we have a coach or we have some, some people that are within our circle, some mentors or some, people that we look to for guidance and constructive criticism. I'll tell you, I still send check-in pictures to a group of mentors that I have and I get constructive criticism from them. Although I know them in real life, I have personal relationships with them, but they are objective and honest. So bodybuilding has taught me the process of being able to take on constructive criticism, both from those that I appreciate and I love and that are actual friends of mine, and then also strangers, and being able to take that on and really, be open and um willing to accept that and try to better myself as a result. So it's the same thing with your book. This is a personal memoir essentially of you recounting your memories and your experiences and your lessons. And
Yep.
now people are going to give you constructive criticism on them, but also it's going to allow you to gain introspection on those things and maybe look at some of your experiences a little bit differently, or how you depict them or how you explain them. It's going to change your ability to do that and most likely better it.
I 100% agree, man. I'm ready for the lesson. The humility to be good. I'll be an absolute terror as the CEO next year after it. I promise you that. All right. So let's get into this shit. All right. So fat loss phase training. So as I was alluding to when we kicked this off, man, like back in the day, I used to read the magazines. It's like, oh, you go into training where you add giant sets, or you do drop sets, or you do like all these crazy intensifiers, or you would do, in the case of what I encounter, a lot of people be like, all right, if we're going to lose fat, I should do really high rep and really low weight. Like, because you get a lot of gym pop people who like think like you burn it in, you burn those cuts in. And then you got just bodybuilders who suddenly will just completely change their routine and add extra sets, as Brandon likes to say, junk volume, to people who generally just make a mistake of thinking more is more is more while starving themselves and not preparing their calories accordingly by doing like things like Orange Theory or spin classes or CrossFit morning and night, and then all these other things in between. So we wanted to really break it down to like what it is to actually set up a fat loss phase in the regards to training, to be able to better get the results that you want without losing the progress you made. So
Absolutely.
B, with that being said, I'm gonna turn the reins to you for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so we had a great episode last week. So seeing,
Yeah, that was good,
as
man.
we got incredible reception, honestly, for
Yeah.
that last episode with John Jewett. And we covered how to, for those that haven't listened, I definitely suggest you guys go back, listen to it. We covered the topic of how to approach training during a contest prep. So I figured it would be only appropriate and fitting that we followed that episode up, especially with all the feedback and questions that we got on it, with a deep dive into how to approach training during a fat loss dieting phase. Since many in our audience aren't competitors, so they're not getting to essential levels of body fat like we would if we were doing a contest prep. So, they might not need to consider everything we discussed last week. I also saw that you're doing today a IG live with one of our friends, Chanel Collette, on the topic of fat loss phase training. So after we record the podcast, we'll be jumping on with that. So I figured it was just a timely opportunity for us to cover this as well. And then I
Mhm.
also received several questions from followers and listeners of the show about how to apply some of the concepts we spoke with John about last week to their own fat loss phases. So essentially, today we're going to be expanding upon our training talk. And really, what we have to realize is optimizing our training programming is one of the most important yet often overlooked variables in a fat loss phase. And oftentimes, we get into this mode during a diet where we focus on the wrong things. when it comes to training due to the misconceptions many have about using training as a method of expending calories and burning body fat rather than what it's the intended usage of it, which is to build and maintain muscle during a deficit. So throughout the years of dieting for photo shoots and shows myself, I've literally tried every approach to training possible. Like you were mentioning, Jeff, I've done the extremely high volume metabolic phases that are filled with tons of high rep and metabolite accumulation work. And then I've also done the opposite end of the spectrum. So I've done those lower volume programs, which focus far too heavily on strength progression and just, the whole intention and focus of the program was maintaining strength on compound movements with the mentality, I'm putting this in air quotes, that's what you need to do. You need to maintain load to maintain muscle. But, over the years, by taking a slightly different approach with both myself and my clients over the years, as well as diving into literature, I've been able to find out and learn what works best when it comes to how to program training during a deficit, and have been able to determine what principles and methods to keep, and then also what ones to discard, which we'll go on about throughout the course of the show. So before we get into how to adjust training during a diet, it's important to first start by highlighting the top training mistakes we see others make during a fat loss phase diet itself. Because when it comes to
wearing garbage bags, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to training during a fat loss phase, the main mistake I see dieters make is thinking they need to make drastic changes to their training programming and approach as soon as they enter a deficit with the intention of losing body fat. And most of those who are involved in fitness tend to swing from one extreme to another. We know that, it's kind of this extremist mentality.
If it's not, then it's not the right sport for you. You know what I mean? It's almost
but we're
like
talking, no. If we're talking bodybuilding, that's one thing. But with fitness, it shouldn't be that.
I agree.
However, there's a lot of people that they take this approach where they kind of exist at opposite ends of the spectrum. So we basically have if we're going to break it down basically and simplistically, we basically have two camps that have opposing thoughts of how we should approach training during a fat loss phase. So, on one side of the spectrum, we have the train less crowd. So we have those who think that because we're in an energy deficit, we should just cut down our volume to maintenance volume and do as little as needed to maintain muscle tissue. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we had the train more crowd. So these are the people that you were recounting about during the 90s, or, it still exists today. We have those who think they should just crank up their training volume to increase our calorie output and increase the deficit through our training sessions. And so on the other hand, I've always existed somewhere in the middle. I'm going to be honest, I'm not an extremist by any means. I'm very moderate in my approach to a lot of things, but I find that oftentimes, we have people on opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's because those are sexier options, or those are sexier standpoints, because they stand in direct opposition to other people. So when we hear a lot of people within this industry that they're yelling one thing that diametrically opposes what another camp is yelling. And oftentimes the moderate approach isn't the sexy approach. So I understand that, but often the truth lies in the middle. So I've always been in that middle level where I believe training, the training that built our muscle in the first place will maintain it. And training should be adjusted in a reactive manner based on both autoregulation and our recovery capacity, which will change throughout the course of the diet. Not, training shouldn't just, we shouldn't be just making arbitrary adjustments to our training in advance and in a proactive manner. And then when it comes to other mistakes I see other, people make within their training during dieting phase, one of the number one things I see is that a lot of people do not follow a structured and periodized training program. So we have to realize that failing to follow a structured training program is a plan for failure, especially when you're experiencing diet fatigue. You should aim to have a program that includes consistent, trackable lifts and movements that will allow you to assess your progress from week to week, as winging it during a diet isn't an optimal way to go about training, especially as we want to do whatever possible to manage both the physical and the mental fatigue that comes along with dieting. So having a training program set is one way to reduce decision fatigue during a diet. Another mistake, I see people focus far too heavily, and this is a mistake I made myself, where they're focusing far too much on load, so like the weight on the bar, rather than on exercise execution. So, it is important. We do want to do our best to maintain strength during a diet, but it shouldn't be seen as the most important component of our training, because to maintain muscle tissue, if you're drastically reducing your training volume just to maintain the weight on the bar, you're going to be putting yourself at more of a predisposition to losing tissue because of that reduction in volume, because volume is much more linked to the accrual and maintenance of muscle mass than is strength. And we also have to take into consideration, this is something that I think a lot of people often overlook. Strength can be reduced in a fat loss phase just due to losing body mass, because that's going to change our leverages on many movements. So we shouldn't be trying to just focus on load progressions and increasing strength if it's coming at the expense of form and execution of the exercises we're doing, because muscles don't grow from the load on the bar, the weight on the bar. They grow from placing an adequate and sufficient amount of tension on the target musculature. But if you're changing your form and you're, using a partial range of motion just to get the same weight that you were, the weight up that you were previous to the diet, but you're actually not targeting and actually putting a sufficient tension stimulus on the muscle, you're not going to maintain it. And then on my end, the last training mistake that I often see is using resistance training as your primary method of burning calories. And resistance training is the most effective way to build and maintain our muscle. However, as we've covered multiple times on the show, it's a much less useful tool to create a deficit from, which is why we should focus on training for building and maintaining our muscle mass, and then focus on our diet, our cardio, and our NEAT and physical activity levels to induce a calorie deficit and actually lose body fat. So, Jeff, do you have any additional, training mistakes you see dieters making in a fat loss phase? I know you hit on some of the HIIT classes. I specifically stayed away from those. Anything else you want to add to it?
When it comes to training mistakes, I usually just see people I can watch this because I'm at my gym all the time, right? So like I see competitors to gym pop. And the one thing that I'll see is when people are really tired, they'll just keep going and the reps will get sloppier. And I think that the risk of injury goes up. And I think a lot of people don't think about that a lot. And another top training mistake I usually see in a fat loss phase is people immediately going to like supersets, trisets, and giant sets.
Intensity techniques.
Yeah, I think that's usually like, I'm like, look, if you didn't need them before, I mean, I've got a hell of a central nervous system. I can take some punishments. We've talked about my training routine. You've seen some of the stuff but you can't lie to the results. But I like this way of training better. So I've learned to adjust these things now based upon the new research, which we're about to get into next. But I think what everyone tries to do is when they go for fat loss, they throw a kitchen sink approach at it. And I'm like, it's like building a fire. Get the fire going and then maybe throw some more gas on the damn thing and then inch it along, but they don't correlate that to their training in regards to a fat loss phase, like meaning they just go nuclear option right out the gate. And it's like, you can phase it up and down.
So my whole thing with training intensity techniques is if you weren't utilizing those prior to the diet itself, you shouldn't be adding those in.
I agree.
If you're not using those and really seeing how your recovery capacity is impeded or how it's impacted while you have enough energy in the system, when you're at a surplus or at least at maintenance calories, then when you're in an energy deficit, utilizing techniques that are going to increase fatigue, both, peripheral on the muscle itself, because it's going to have a lot of metabolic stress and metabolite accumulation. So we see with a lot of intensity techniques, they're higher rep, they're shorter rest periods in between, because it's stuff like drop sets, rest pause sets, supersets, giant sets, like you mentioned. There's going to be less overall rest intervals in between. So you're not going to clear out the hydrogen ions, the lactate. You're going to have all these metabolite accumulation, which causes that burn. And it's also linked to peripheral fatigue, but peripheral fatigue, which is your local fatigue in the muscle itself, actually links to central fatigue. And so then you're already predisposed to more fatigue from a dietary perspective, because you have less energy coming in, and then you're just driving that fatigue and you're lowering your ability to actually have output. So now you're just doing, like I mentioned, junk volume. You're doing work that's at a less sufficient level of intensity. Like you think you're being intense because you're pumping away, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's such at a low barrier of entry. Your ability to handle sufficient loads to stay in a close proximity to failure, you're really only getting there because you're inducing so much fatigue at other levels that aren't linked to hypertrophy. And when we actually look at things like drop sets, we look at rest pause sets, cluster set training, they're never more stimulative or more hypertrophic than straight set training itself in the literature. When they do one-to-one comparison, they're never equivalent, and sometimes they're actually more detrimental because of the fatigue accumulation. And that's where the participants or the subjects are at energy balance. So they're in maintenance calories or they're in a surplus. So now let's compound that with the fact that now we have less energy on board because we have to be in a deficit to induce fat loss. It's kind of like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, no. And that's what I'm saying. I think that, and we have a lot of comparisons listening to this. We also have a lot of gym pop people because I know people in my gym listen to this. And that's the one thing I think that everyone's just got to take away. If you weren't doing it before the fat loss training phase, you probably shouldn't just deploy it during the fat loss training phase, just to think so. I think that we could roll that one up in a tight summary. But we actually have research kind of talking about this because, a lot of people, I used to always say, hey, the bodybuilders, if you look at them, really were pioneers to the degree. And they've got, like, it's like the outlaw medicine, we're like out there always figuring stuff out. And then you'll kind of see the research kind of say, oh, progressive overload does matter, or mechanical tension, some of the stuff that we already knew that we were already doing for,
We
decades.
saw it work in the trenches, and,
Yeah.
they validate it through
Yeah.
mechanisms, essentially what we were seeing. But they also, at the same time, there's a lot of stuff. A lot of people talk about bro science, but bro science often becomes, it's empirical science that becomes evidence enforced science when it does get tested. But then there are other methodologies, like high protein diets was something we saw it within the trenches. It's something that's been validated in the research. But then there's other things that have been, bro science myths that people thought, utilizing tilapia to thin the skin, stuff like that. It's been disproven. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's a give and take, and it really matters on the context of the approach and the method. And that's why I said, there's stuff that, both through my experience and then also diving in deeply into the literature, I'm all about that Bruce Lee mentality. Take what's useful and discard what's useless.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, but you would see these pros, like, cause we read the magazines, you'd be on the boards and people are doing like 20 sets of chest and like 18 sets of drop sets and just all this other crazy stuff. And, by and large, people ended up showing up looking good that way. But there was just, I always remember, like, it was just like the inflammation effect, what we know about cycles and things like that and everything. But there's now research talking about this that kind of says, hey, some of this stuff was kind of wrong. You know what I mean? This is actually true. So, Brandon, what are some of the research studies that are out there that kind of back this up and down what we're trying to talk about, adjusting or not adjusting your training, or actually just setting your training, perhaps better worded, to a fat loss phase?
Absolutely. So actually, we had, so you're talking about multiple lines of research. Actually, this year was the first time that we've had a systematic review on this topic. So just this past year, we had a systematic review release looking at the effects of resistance training during a calorie deficit. And this was entitled, I believe it was Lean Mass Sparing in Resistance Trained Athletes During Caloric Restriction, the Role of Resistance Training Volume. And this review looked at 15 studies of resistance trained individuals. So this is huge, guys, because a lot of times in studies on hypertrophy, on resistance training, it is done in untrained populations because they really want to see the true effect of the training itself. And those that are going to elicit the best responses are going to be newbie trainers because they're so sensitive to the stimulus of training. But in this specific study, they utilized all studies looking at already trained individuals like ourselves. And so in this analysis, they looked at 15 studies of those type of individuals, resistance trained individuals, in a dieting scenario, and divided the studies based on different categories of training volume. And each training intervention that they looked at was labeled as either being high volume, which was defined as training with 10 or more sets per muscle per week, so 10 hard working sets; reduced volume, which is where they saw that training volume went down over the course of the dieting phase; and then progressive overload over time. So this means that throughout the course of the dieting phase, they progressed some type of aspect of their training, whether it was rep progressions, load progressions, or set increases. And when we look at the overall findings and results, they found that utilizing a progressive overload approach where volume load was increased over time seemed to be more effective on average than reducing training volume when it came to preserving muscle in a deficit. So according to the study and the literature that they looked at, if we're going to do anything with our training volume over the course of the fat loss phase, we'd want to either increase it or maintain it. But it's also important to realize that this review had a number of limitations within it, which is why it's always important to read more than just the abstract. And this is kind of what John and I were were touching on last week, because this is one of the reviews that he had looked at, as did I. And we have to realize that although this review included studies on resistance trained individuals who were in a calorie deficit, this review didn't directly compare high and low volume training. So it wasn't like they looked at just high volume and just low volume and put people on either intervention and then cross them over to see the effect that it would have during a calorie deficit in terms of muscle preservation. And also, despite using the catch-all phrase volume, which many of us associate with how many hard sets per week we do in the gym, many of these studies actually calculated volume as what's called volume load, which is reps times sets times load lifted. So it wasn't directly just the sets. And so I think what we can take away from the study is that we don't want to automatically just cut down and reduce our training volume just because we're entering a fat loss phase. And what this review also reinforces is how essential progressive overload is to training, because in order to grow or maintain muscle, we must meet a sufficient level of tension, which is what I was alluding to earlier about, not just looking at load, but looking at tension stimulus, because you need to hit a sufficient level of tension stimulus to increase muscle protein synthesis and put us in a state of positive protein balance, which is especially important during a dieting phase, because dieting is inherently a catabolic process, as it decreases our baseline levels of muscle protein synthesis and increases our rates of muscle protein breakdown. So training is one way that we can help overcome this catabolic state. And then progressive overload is achieved when we meet that requisite tension stimulus and see a progression in our performance as a result of this. So over time, we'll need to increase the stimulus within our training as our training capacity improves, which is most likely why they saw the best results in this progressive overload group that increased volume over time.
I have a question for you. Actually more of a statement. No, actually way more of a question. When you're referencing catabolic states, could you elaborate like what a catabolic state is for our listeners? Like summarize it in simple sense, because people hear that and they think anabolic. So immediately a lot of people might go, oh, anabolic, like anabolic steroids. And there's like positive, growth environment and negative growth environment. And that's essentially what the two are. But can you elaborate like on what catabolic really is and like what compounds from that?
Yeah, so essentially being in a calorie deficit is a catabolic state. And what that means is it lowers our baseline and resting levels of muscle protein synthesis. And so really what we're looking at are two different states of being in protein balance. So you have a state of muscle protein breakdown where we're breaking down muscle proteins, and that is a catabolic stimulus. And then we have an anabolic stimulus, which is the state of being in a state of muscle protein synthesis. So really what we want to do is make sure that we're in positive protein balance. So we're in an anabolic state, meaning our levels of muscle protein synthesis exceed our levels of muscle protein breakdown. And the reason that dieting causes a catabolic state is because what we have to think about it from this capacity. You're going into an energy deficit. So you are consuming less energy, or you're burning more energy than you're consuming. And so within that, we have to think about catabolism really just means the breakdown of tissues. So in order to break down body fat, liberate body fat, mobilize it, and break it down and actually expel body fat in terms of losing actual body fat, you have to be in a state of negative energy balance, which is catabolic. So we are breaking down tissues. However, we want to break down predominantly fat tissue and maintain muscle tissue, which is why it's so important to ensure that our levels of muscle protein synthesis, we can still be in a state of negative energy balance, but in positive protein balance. And one way to do this is getting insufficient protein. But the most effective way we have to, rescue this decrease in muscle protein synthesis is through our training, as training is the most robust stimulus for increasing muscle protein synthesis. So generally, we want to make sure that we're training sufficiently hard with enough volume to increase those levels of muscle protein synthesis to kind of rescue ourselves out of that catabolic state. Because essentially, look at it like this: the diet is catabolic, training is anti-catabolic. So it is something to balance out that state.
I appreciate that, because I know a lot of people might want to know that answer. So it's really well said and really well put together and a good way to take away. How do we want to, okay, so the next bullet point we wanted to talk about was how we approach training during a diet. What would we want to talk more about that we already haven't? Because I know for me, my big thing is everyone tends to go do the opposite of what they did that got them there in the spot where they can be healthy enough to diet. Because I think that's a consideration you have to talk about, or at least consider when you get to a point you're going to do a fat loss. Are you healthy enough to do it in the first place? But what do you want to talk about more about how we approach training during diet?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about just essentially how I approach training, and then also how I approach training programming with my clients.
Oh, good. I'll
And
sprinkle in mine on it afterwards.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
no,
So,
good.
within my own training, I generally keep training the same or very similar when entering the diet phase as it was in the building phase prior, until I need to make adjustments based on both my biofeedback and my recovery capacity. And really, in my mind, regardless of how deep into a diet I get, I always make sure or aim to ensure my training is done at a level that's providing a sufficient stimulus, as that's what's going to maintain muscle. So I always, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, I always say this: what built the muscle will maintain the muscle. So when it comes to my training program, both for myself and especially for my clients, I like to keep volume around the same threshold we've been using before or prior to the diet. So for my clients, I'm tracking their volume throughout the course of each mesocycle and each training block they complete. And then I also collect data that helps me to determine how effective that level or that amount of volume was for them in terms of their training performance, their growth, their recovery capacity, their biofeedback, all these different metrics that I track within my weekly check-ins with them. And so generally when it comes to a dieting phase, I'll start them out at a level of volume which I know provides a sufficient stimulus to build and maintain muscle, because I've seen in the past with them, but it also isn't at a level where it's incurring too much fatigue. And this is all based on the training cycles we've run in the past. And this level of volume is generally going to fall between their minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume, as we can't just use the same minimum volume, as this needs to increase to maintain tissue. Because, like I said, training is the anti-catabolic stimulus, whereas we're in a dieting phase. So we're in a catabolic period. So we need to raise ourselves out of that period. But at the same time, I won't make large increases to set additions or to load progressions to get to like maximum recoverable volume that I would in a building phase, because our MRV, or our maximum recoverable volume, will decrease during a diet as compared to when we're in a calorie surplus and
It's
have
true.
tons of energy in the system. So I'll usually set their programs up in a manner where the volume is at a moderate level, and then I'll make small adjustments, to volume via like set additions if it's clear that a specific muscle, and I do this on a muscle by muscle basis. What you guys have to realize: a lot of people think that muscle growth is systemic, and if it was, we would be squatting and getting big biceps. Muscle growth is a localized process. So it's about how many sets are you doing, how many hard sets, how much sufficient stimulus are you placing on each target muscle that you're trying to grow. So I will only make set increases if it's clear that a specific muscle isn't being adequately stimulated. And if I'm receiving, feedback from them that indicates that they need a larger stimulus, such as if they're not, they're feeling like no soreness, or they're getting no muscle disruption, or feeling no fatigue from their session. But overall, I'm trying to make very small changes and adjustments, especially at one time. Like I like making small changes at one time, and having a fairly standardized program based on the data that I have on that client, because that allows me to isolate variables more and see how the diet is working. Because in my mind, I really like isolating things and then tracking changes, engaging progressions as a result of isolated changes. And so, really, my whole thing is I don't want too many moving parts in their training program. Like a lot of people throw shit at the wall to see what sticks, but they don't know what's stuck. They just know something stuck. They don't know what variable. They don't know if it was the set increases, so the volume increase. They don't know if it was the rep progression. They don't know if it was the intensity progression. So they're throwing all this, all these methods, drop sets, supersets, they're descending rest periods, all these things just to get a stimulus, but they don't know which of those variables actually elicited the change, whether it's a positive change like maintenance of muscle or building a muscle, or a negative change like additional fatigue, indices of higher stress, feeling burnt out, maybe an injury or some type of connective tissue disruption, or pain. So really, a lot of times what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm able to separate the noise from the signal, which can impact and skew my ability to determine how the dietary changes that I'm also making. Because remember, we're in the dieting phase, so that's a major component. I'm manipulating the diet and the nutrition, both through macronutrient manipulation as well as calorie manipulation. And so if I change too many things at one time, it's going to skew my ability to determine how every change that I'm making is impacting their biofeedback. And then I'm also aiming to have, both myself and my clients aim for more conservative increases in either their reps or their load, which is done by steadily reducing their reps in reserve, which is essentially, a scale of proximity to failure throughout the course of a mesocycle. as I want to make sure that their training is both challenging and overloading, but not overly fatiguing. So it's not like I'm starting week one of a training cycle with them going to failure. Like we are progressing throughout the mesocycle and descending and going through a period where we're at more reps away from failure and then closer to failure as we get deeper into the mesocycle itself.
Um, I think you gave like a really good example for people who've got good experience. For those people who are like coming off the street or are dead up just beginners, I have like your basic 3 to 4 sets per exercise because they don't understand like RPE or RIR at all. They don't even have the coordination to properly press dumbbells yet. So I usually kind of work on a blueprint with them for a little bit and kind of get them good at mastering exercises. I encourage people who, if you're listening and just going to get up off the couch and say tomorrow's your day, that's what you should do. There are a lot of good apps out there. There are a lot of good coaches that probably provide beginner good workouts that you could get off of YouTube, off of Instagram, places like that. I think even Brandon, myself probably have thrown some free stuff up there over the time of doing it and kind of go off of that because it's better to have a little bit of a map. And when you're just starting, it's more important to get the habits down. It's like your sleep, your steps, your good food choices, your good routines, your habits that matter. Because when you're going to go like down the road into a fat loss journey, because you get a lot of people do when they come into a gym, they think they're going to drop 30 pounds in 30 days. They're looking for a miraculous thing. And you have to kind of be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't even know how to use that leg press right. You know what I mean? Like, and having that. So I think from a gym pop standpoint, if you're listening to this, find something that you can do that's easy to maintain and that you can do in repetition for a little bit and get good at. It's like being a quarterback and getting reps under center. You don't just go out there and just immediately start throwing 70-yard bombs that are on target. It just doesn't happen that way. And then I think it's, after you kind of get your habits down, it's expanding upon your training. That's maybe when you look at getting a coach, someone else to kind of help guide you to the next level of like Brandon was talking about, understanding your biometrics, understanding all those biofeedback markers and how to apply them to properly adjust your training. So that's kind of how I would look at it from people who go into from gym pop, because they're already coming at you at a deficit. So they're technically already in a diet, and a lot of the time, as you're feeding them up, if anything, you know what I mean? And getting them up and out. So, that's how I would probably plan there trying to.
Yeah. So Jeff, that's how you start off now. For suggestions or how you do your programming for your Gen Pop clients in general, how are you having them progress throughout the course of a training cycle? Like you said, you're starting them out with a basic, volume threshold, kind of like baseline volume is kind of what it sounds like. You're setting everyone at a baseline volume that you've seen work. Now, how are you progressing them throughout the course of a training cycle? What areas are you looking for them to progress? Because regardless if you're new or not, you need to progress the stimulus over time. And so what areas of their training are you looking at? Intensity, relative intensity? Are you looking at volume accumulation? Are you looking at looking at different intensity thresholds, so percent of 1 rep max? How would you suggest, or how do you utilize different progressions? Like I use a descending reps in reserve model, but I'm also looking at set additions, and then I'm also increasing the relative intensity throughout the course of the cycle. How do you go about, adjusting during a diet? Because remember, how we start a diet isn't going to be how we end the diet. And that's the same thing with our training.
So you're asking me for that from a gym pop perspective. Like if they were
like
coming
with your
to me,
Gen Pop clients,
how I progress them. So when they're coming in, they're looking at their training. It's really a lot of it, dude. It's more of trying to get them to be confident because they're very intimidated to be doing it anyway. And they feel like because like think about me and you could lay up next to him on a bench and we're going to look like pros. And they're like, holy shit, I'm just in here trying to drop 20 pounds for Susie's wedding, in 8 weeks or whatever, so it's really a sight to see. So it's really, honestly, man, I do my progression through confidence. Like, do you feel more confident with the weight? How did the weight feel? How did you balance it out? Scale of 1 to 10, like, 10 being like, Jeff, I hate you, I want you to die. And 1 being like, I love you, I'm going to send you a box of chocolates. How hard was it? You kind of make it just relational. I'm real relational with clients and kind of understanding that. But I always tell them, like, you shouldn't be looking at always progressing weight. Sometimes it's getting a few more reps. Sometimes it's about like, did you feel like you executed that exercise better? Because a lot of people will just like, you got to remember, gym pop people, again, they think that coming in doing a new workout every time will get them magical results too. They think that's the key to fat loss.
They're chasing novelty rather than progression.
Exactly. So the way I track progression with them is based on confidence, usually the first couple months. And then after that, I get them really comfortable because man, dude, it's overwhelming. Like if you hit them with so much shit up front, they're like, you know what I mean? Like I don't even know how to get 10,000 steps a day. I don't even know how to manage my schedule for that. And you're telling me I need to wear an Oura ring and report my body temperature and the trends and everything else. Like coaching for some people, you've got to just make it very basic. And a lot of it's just getting them confident that they can do this. Because you got to remember, a lot of gym pop people have a lot of people around them who don't do this. And they're stepping out on a ledge by themselves with a spotlight on them, with a whole bunch of people around them that aren't going to support them. So you have to really instill the confidence factor with gym pop people early on. And that's where coaches who are listening, or anyone who's even into fitness, if you really want to help someone, gyms are loaded with gym pop people who could use your help. And most people are real appreciative when you give it to them. Like if you see someone doing the exercise wrong, just be like, you have to, like, hey, you're doing that wrong. You'd be like, hey, have you ever seen it? Have you ever tried this way of trying it? And this is what you're aiming for, and like really talk to them. So many people are so thankful. I mean, that's how I built my in-person brand. I would
I
walk to
also
the
think
gym and
it
do
really
that.
helps that you're a gym owner, because a lot of people, they're very intimidated by people in the gym, like
Yep.
people that look really fit or have been there for a long period of time, and they're opposed to unsolicited advice. So they didn't ask for it, they don't want it, or they come off like they don't want it. And so really what it comes down to is just being a friendly individual in the gym, but also being the owner of the gym, walking around there. You're able to give advice just from like almost like a professional standpoint, like, hey, them, you're kind of the mayor of your gym, I've been in your gym, I know what type of atmosphere and culture you've built. You're able to say, hey, listen, let me show you how to do that, or what are you trying to target? All right, you're
Yep.
looking to get your lats, let's activate it in this fashion, let's make sure that we utilize these type of cues or whatever it may be, and they're going to be much more receptive to that. Whereas a lot of people, they don't have that in the gym, or even those that have transitioned out of in-person training and just go to their local gym, they're not able to give that unsolicited advice.
I 100% agree. And that's why I always tell coaches, like when I start working with them, like, look, man, like you're the biggest thing that separates you and a client's success and you getting 10 more clients from that one person. Because Brandon, like I told you this, I think we talked on the phone. You help someone lose 10 pounds just randomly that you walk by in the street. They'll forever be like, oh man, I know the best trainer ever. His name's Brandon. And they will tell everybody about you.
The
And
proof is in the pudding,
yeah,
especially when it comes to lifestyle clients, because they have a huge network of people that aren't that fit, so they're not getting help yet. But also, the thing is, I've never had to do marketing. I know you have expanded to other aspects of marketing because you have a team, but individually, I've never done marketing for my business, because almost all of my leads come through referral, come through word of mouth, because of doing good work.
yeah. And that's why I think in the day and age, because like we could have made this, we could get on social media and make this shit sound so high and so extreme. But for the majority of the people who are listening, a lot of people like just throw the kitchen sink in it. And gym pop people are no different, and they're doing that with no confidence. If I just had to kind of say that. So if you're a coach and you're listening to this, or anyone, like I said, in health fitness, give them a hand. I promise you, they're looking forward to it. We're about it, man. We've been on some good little different subsections of things today. We've had a good little conversation about that.
Oh yeah.
What addition did I answer your question on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, before we go on to the last topic, I do
Sure.
want to ask this question, because I go often back and forth, because that my target demographic is mostly, or the general, or the vast majority of people I work with are intermediate to advanced. I'm kind of known for
Correct.
taking like intermediates and bringing them to the advanced level. And so I don't work with as many beginners, but I do have people that are like newer to resistance training. There are former athletes. Like I have a woman right now who's incredible. She has made so much progression in the last 6 months we've been working together. She was a competitive triathlete, so she has an athletic background, but not
Right.
within resistance training. So I've progressed her within the gym, and I've utilized a little bit more of obviously it is a less complicated, or I want to say less complex and more simplified form of training periodization. However, I've also been able to utilize different progressions, because she's so used to training in the context of a program, a program template and things of that sort, because she was coached, professionally in terms of her triathlon training. However, if you got a brand new beginner, someone that's new to resistance training, or maybe only has a couple years in the gym, what is your approach, and what are your thoughts on training to failure? Are you progressing them in terms of relative intensity, meaning increasing intensity throughout the course of a mesocycle and over the course of a training cycle, or do you put them right into the flame, put them to failure so they learn how to do it?
You're asking me for beginner people.
for newer individuals, say 1 to 3 years of training, but not a very structured, the people that come into your gym.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I get what you're saying. So like usually after 6 months to a year, I can kind of tell people who are really kind of starting to grasp it and can handle it without me overwhelming them. You know what I mean? And I'll start progressing it. Like, hey, when you're not here, I want you doing this. I'll give them a workout. And then when they're with me, we kind of follow that workout. And I might make substitutions based upon similar things, just if I want to. I think flirting with intensity is great to begin to understand at year one, to really kind of understand like what it takes to kind of go that extra little oomph, because usually a year in is when people hit the oomph part. You know what I mean? They're like, all right, especially dedicated people. I've seen them. They'll drop like Austin 100 pounds. And now he's like barely dropping anything. I'm like, yeah, because, you get that oomph part. You got to go a little bit harder at the gym. You got to not put as much shit in your mouth when you're not looking. I mean, there's just things like that you got to pay attention to. So I think appropriate answer is, if you're coaching someone and you have a 1-year client and they have a good grasp of your offense, and what I mean by offense is your ability to communicate as a coach and to get through to them where they understand it relatively well, that they could go out and apply it, I think you begin flirting with them on intensity in year one. RIR, RPE, having them sending you videos. I think people watching their videos is a great thing to do. If you're unsure, watch it. You look at it, you'll be like, oh, that's ugly. You know what I mean? And you will step away from it. So that would be my advice. Did that answer it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I always like hearing, I often have this conversation because when I get on a podcast and I talk about relative intensity, like how close of a proximity to failure I'm utilizing, I generally will walk it between 3 to 4 reps in reserve at the beginning of a mesocycle. And then we'll progress a client throughout the course of the mesocycle to 0 reps in reserve, which is to failure, to
Yeah.
technical failure, where you can't do another quality rep. It's not momentary muscular failure, but it's right to the point that you cannot do another quality rep. So that is a 10 RPE or a 0 reps in reserve or 0 RRR. And a lot of times some people, will ask me, my mentees and stuff, well, can you trust that? Well, at the level that I'm at with the clients that I have, the experience they have within training, generally the average client that I work with is able to gauge proximity to failure. And we actually see that in the literature. When someone has 1 or less years of training, their ability to gauge their proximity to failure is drastically off. So they've done research studies. Even Eric Helms did a study where he looked at, they had people or give their 10 rep max, and then they had them come in, and it was both on, I believe, the bench press and the back squat, and they put garbage bags over the plate so they couldn't see, and they had them rep to failure in lab conditions. And the average person that was 1 year or less trained got 16 reps out of their 10 rep max. So they were 6 reps off, 6 reps in reserve off. However, and they thought they were a failure. However, there was some individuals that got up to 22 to 24 reps, meaning they were, when they thought they were at, what they failed at 10 reps, generally in the gym, what their working weight was on a 10 rep max was actually their 24 rep max. So it's drastically off. But then we look at the failure literature by like James Steele and some of the guys in the UK, and we see that on average, or Hackett, who did a research study on bodybuilders themselves, generally bodybuilders are within 0 to 1 rep of the accuracy of, if they say, listen, what is your 12 rep max? They will fail within 11 or 13 reps of that same load that they utilize. So it's something it's extremely accurate in terms of, reps in reserve estimation. So I'm able to utilize that with clients. But I also do think that the reason that I'm able to do that both myself, because I utilize a descending or a progressive reps in reserve model myself within my own training programming, but I'm also able to utilize that with my clients, is because we've been there.
Yep.
Like I love the expression, you got to get close enough to the sun to know what it's like to get burnt. And so you got to go, you need to test yourself and push yourself to failure. Train for an extended period of time, training to failure, so you know what your limits are. And that's why I often, at the end of a mesocycle, will still have advanced trainees who know how to gauge reps in reserve. I don't keep them at 1 reps in reserve, because as our training in our capacity and experience increases and improves over time, what is our true failure changes, whether it be in the course of a dieting phase or a building phase. During a building phase, it's obviously going to progress up. The amount of reps or the amount of load we can use and go to failure is going to increase. And sometimes in a dieting phase, it's going to decrease what our true 0 RIR is, or the amount of reps that we could do with a given load. So I believe in testing that at least 1 week of every single mesocycle to act as a way to readjust our gauge of proximity to failure.
Oh, no, I like that. That's a good one. All right. I think we got all that. Now, last thing we want to talk about, was there any additional considerations to make when looking at training during a diet? I think I covered all my things. I think we went down a good enough rabbit hole from my end out, but whatever you got to say, let's hit it.
All right. So, yeah, I think there's still additional ones. And I think it's because I work with so many people on fat loss that I'm considering so many different variables within training. I never look at these things as silos. So, I said that on the episode last week. A lot of people separate things out. They're looking at diet as one entity, training as another entity, cardio as another entity, physical activity as another thing. I'm always looking at everything like a pizza pie, and it's all a piece of the equation. And so, when we're in a dieting phase, there are various factors we need to consider throughout the course of the diet that'll impact how we adjust our training. These include things like our current level of body fat percentage. So, if you're starting off a diet, you're going to have higher body fat percentages and body fat levels, which provides us with more fat to use for energy, which is why now I notice with many of my lifestyle clients, we can recomp during a diet and actually gain muscle throughout the course of dropping body fat. And that can even happen in even intermediate and advanced trainees during the initial phases of a diet before they get very, very lean. And the likelihood of this recomposition effect goes down. Also have to consider the length of the diet. So how long have you been dieting for? Because early on in a diet, you'll be able to handle your normal training volume, or you might potentially be able to do a bit more because you're going to increase your fitness level. So say, for instance, you were in a building phase and you were doing no cardio, which is not something I would suggest. However, say that your cardiovascular capacity was down. We start doing some cardio, you lose some weight, you're now more fit. You're going to be able to increase your training volume tolerance. And this is something I always talk about, energy flux. This is why I like to keep physical activity in year round, because it improves both your training volume tolerance and your recovery capacity, because it works on your aerobic capacity. And so in the beginning of a fat loss phase and through the first course, the first couple of weeks or months of dieting, you're going to be able to either do more volume or handle the same amount of volume. But as the diet extends, or if you're someone who needs to run a really long fat loss phase because you have a ton of weight to lose, your training volume should start to stay more constant. So it shouldn't be fluctuating as much. You want to maintain it to the best of your ability. But if you get 6 months into a diet or you get super lean, like we spoke about with John, that's where John was alluding to. He might decrease training volume towards the latter stage of a diet for contest prep because they're at essential levels of body fat. So for people that are listening to this that are more of the lifestyle, you're not going to have to make those adjustments. But just know that if you're getting, you're long into a diet, you shouldn't be making too many aggressive increases in volume because you don't have enough energy in the system. We also have to look at the depth of the deficit. So how much of a cut in calories have you made, or how low are your calories currently? Because that's going to affect your energy availability. So energy availability, as Eric Helms had hit on, was essentially the energy we're taking in the form of food and the energy we're expending through our physical exercise. So how much energy do we have to run not only the physiological processes, but the process of training? Another big thing, carb intake. Let's think about it. Like, it's your carbohydrates are going to determine how much high intensity exercise will be impacted, because weight training, resistance training is a glycolytic activity. And so for me, this is personally something I utilize nutrient timing as a result of this. So I'm a big advocate of placing most of my clients and myself, like my carbs, around the peri-workout window in a fat loss phase to optimize both training performance and recovery from that training. We also have to consider fatigue. So how fatigued are you? Need to pay attention to fatigue management during a deficit so we can have productive training sessions. And this is also where I'll utilize, this is something that a lot of people aren't used to doing, but utilizing properly done deloads that I use in a reactive manner. So I don't do them proactively like a lot of people will have templated programs where they go 5 weeks and they automatically deload. Well, I can't predict, and this was something we hit on with John last week, I can't predict how someone's life stresses are going to be, how their sleep quality is going to be over the course of a week, let alone over the course of an entire training cycle. So I do it in a reactive manner based on their biofeedback. And during a deficit, if they are, seeing increased fatigue, both from the dietary fatigue, both from the dietary fatigue, the energy deficit, stress levels within their life that may be exacerbated through dieting and training, I might utilize a deload a little bit more frequently, or I might plug them in at times that I normally wouldn't. And then another thing is just a subsect is how far below your lower intervention point have you gotten? So how lean are you in comparison to how lean you normally are? So, as we spoke about with Eric Helms about body fat set point and settling points, if you are someone that generally maintains a higher level of body fat, that is your homeostasis. You've always been heavier set. You've always had higher body fat percentage. Your lower intervention point might be a little bit higher than someone else. So maybe you get to 15% body fat and you start seeing physiological feedback and pushback from the system. whereas other people could get to 10% body fat and feel, a-okay, because it's within that lower and that upper intervention point, which is essentially like a body fat settling range that they can go between without getting too much negative feedback and negative symptoms. So these are all considerations that will impact your training and your recovery capacity, and that you should be paying attention to, or your coach should be paying attention to. These are things I'm all looking at when I'm making adjustments, both on the dietary side, from a diet breaks, a refeed perspective, and then also from a deload perspective, and then an overall training adjustments perspective.
I have I guess a follow up there. Do you think too many people just put deloads in the moment they like build any stress? Like, because I'm one of those people, like, I won't put a deload in until like I've got 2 weeks of data saying I need to put a deload in. Like, you know what I mean?
I think a lot of people do what's called a proactive deload. They kind of jump the gun, and deloads have become really sexy. So I actually had a conversation last week on a podcast with my buddy Jeff Hone, and he even admitted, and he's an advanced trainee. Kids competed on stage on multiple natural bodybuilding shows, that he got to the point where he had went from never deloading, and then all of a sudden he was seeing all this literature on deloading, which wasn't direct literature because we don't have actual studies on deloads. We have one study on deloads that just came out this past year, but besides that, it's based off strength tapering research, which is done previous to a powerlifting or a weightlifting competition.
Right.
However, he saw how prominent it was becoming, and a lot of people within the space were advocating for deloads, and he started doing them in such a proactive manner, where it was, whether he needed it or not, he thought he needed to take it, because other people were saying, oh, go 3 weeks and then do 1 week deload, or go 4 weeks within an accumulation cycle of your training and then do a deload. So really what I'm about is, I need to see multiple weeks, like you're saying, where I need to see multiple sessions where a client's performance is falling off, their biofeedback is turning negative, or they have really high life stress. Or I might do a reactive deload, and this is in the context of dieting, but say a client has a vacation coming up and they can't get access to a regular gym, and they have only a hotel gym, and they haven't deloaded for 6, 7, 8 weeks. They're at the
best time to do a deload. Damn right.
They're at the end of a training cycle where it's been super progressive. We may push the intensity and the volume that last week, kind of overreach a little bit, and then get them into a place where they don't have to stress about finding this gym because they don't have access to it. So then we're able to do, lower volume, lower intensity sessions, maybe reduce the amount of training sessions for that week. Instead of going 5 days per week, maybe do 4 hotel gym sessions. Then they don't have the mental stress and fatigue of trying to figure this out, and really taking away from their vacation, and they're able to utilize the deload when it was best set, or when it was best for their schedule, for their lifestyle, and for what's going on within the context of their family and everything else, instead of being like, well, I run a 5-to-1 paradigm where we accumulate for 5 weeks and then we deload on the 6th, and then all of a sudden they're a couple weeks into a training cycle and they can't deload, and they have to find a gym, or they have to stress about it. That I don't like that. So it's all reactive. It's based off auto regulation, biofeedback, stress indices. I track a bunch of metrics for recovery, stress, lifestyle. I want to hear about all these different contexts so we can plan that. And I'll ask clients 3 to 6 months in advance, what vacations, what events do you have planned, or do you think you may have coming up within the next 3 to 6 months, so that we can look at things and work backwards. So if I see that a client has a vacation in 7 weeks, we'll accumulate for those 6 weeks, and they know, they have a vacation in 7 weeks and they won't have gym access, or they won't have great gym access. Then I'm able to, what I call backcasting. So I'm going from the date of their vacation and backcasting their training to lead them into being able to deload on that week.
Fair. I think that's a good point. Dude, I think that's our topic. We've gone over for what we normally do. Where can everybody find you at?
Absolutely. Guys, feel free to reach out to me at @BrandonDeCruz_ or via my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. I just want to thank everyone for all the questions, all the feedback, and all the shares that you guys do weekly. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to tag both Jeff and myself in your stories. We really do appreciate it. We try to come with value. And a lot of times these topics are things we're following back up with because guys like yourself, listeners and followers, reached out and asked specific questions. This is specifically from the John Jewett podcast. We wanted to really expand and do a deep dive on a topic that I very rarely see covered. Some people will talk about contest prep, but very rarely do you have any podcasts. I looked for it previous to coming on here where they cover fat loss specific training. So we really wanted to give you guys something that stands apart from what others are doing and really give you as much insight, from our experience, but then also tie in some of the literature as well.
Dude, I can be found at Jeff Unbreakable Black. We got a lot of really good feedback. Mine was a little bit more simpler. They just really liked the fact that how we talked about everything, and so forth. It's funny, like how the audience engages with us so differently. Like I think I probably get the more chill bartender approach, and you're like more like, all right, well, so this is what research et al. 2019 says, and I'm more like, yeah,
I think it's good. I think we bring good
Oh,
variety to the podcast
exactly.
with different personalities. We attract different people. So we're super appreciative for whether you're here for our great personalities or if you're here for the research and for a little bit deeper of a dive into topics, regardless of what purpose we serve for you guys. We're looking to be here on a weekly basis and provide you guys with value.
Damn right. All right, bro. Well, I appreciate it. Today was awesome. I hope you have yourself a badass day.
You too, brother. Later, guys.
Later.